I inherited 1,000 acres of Texas history, but I found a whole neighborhood of entitled millionaires sitting on the edge of it, thinking they owned the view. I was standing at my grandfather's old cattle gate, checking a rusted hinge, when a white BMW X7 skidded to a stop in a cloud of dust. The car didn't just park, it announced its arrival. The door flew open and out stepped Constance Heartwell, HOA President, attorney, and professional menace. She looked like she'd been assembled in a factory that manufactured headaches. Designer sunglasses, a clipboard held like a weapon, and a death grip on a stack of papers. She didn't say hello. She just shoved a violation notice at my chest. "Tear down this gate," she snapped. "You're blocking our private road." Her road. She was standing on the same dirt path my grandfather carved out of brush in 1959. The same land her entire luxury HOA, Willowbrook Estates, was built on without a single legal right-of-way. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even look at the papers. I just nodded, tipped my hat, and returned to my truck. Why? Because tomorrow morning, the county surveyor arrives. And when Constance sees where her million-dollar homes actually sit, let's just say Willowbrook Estates is about to learn who really owns the ground under their feet. What would you do if a corrupt HOA tried claiming your family's legacy? Drop your state in the comments below. My name is Clayton Bridwell. I'm 52, and 8 months ago, I inherited a war zone. When my grandfather, Elias Bridwell, passed away, he left me 1,000 acres of the prettiest ranch land in Cedar Valley, Texas. The old farmhouse still creaks the exact same way it did when I was a kid running to the halls in muddy boots. Every morning, I make black coffee and look out the kitchen window at rolling hills that have been in the Bridwell name since 1962. I'm a semi-retired electrician. I've spent 30 years wiring houses I could never afford to live in. Now, I live off a small Social Security check and the occasional wiring job for neighbors who pay in cash or venison. My wife, Sarah, died of cancer last winter. And let me tell you, that woman was the heart of this land. She always dreamed bigger than our bank account allowed. She used to sit on the porch and talk about starting a scholarship fund for local kids, the ones like us who had the brains for college but not the wallet. We never quite had the money to make it happen. The chemo bills took care of that. The ranch sits on some of the most valuable land in the county now. Developers have been circling like vultures for years. The property is worth about $2.3 million if I ever want to sell my soul and subdivide it. But I live on $1,800 a month. The property taxes keep climbing because of all the fancy developments, like Willowbrook Estates, going up around me. But there is one thing that has never changed: the spring. There is a natural aquifer that feeds into Cedar Creek. My grandfather's was been pulling pure, cold water from that spring since 1964. It's the lifeblood of this ranch. That is where Constance Heartwell enters the picture. She drove up in that pristine BMW wearing $300 heels that had no business touching ranch dirt. Everything about her screamed money and unearned authority. The Chanel sunglasses she never took off, even inside. The way she used legal jargon like a bludgeon, trying to confuse you on purpose. That clipped, nasal voice that made a request sound like a court order. Constance is the president of Cedar Valley Estates, a luxury HOA community built in 2018 right on my northern fence line. We are talking about 200 homes with an average price tag of $800,000. These people have more money than sense, and apparently they think that wealth buys them a right to rewrite geography. She stepped out of that car and immediately started talking down to me like I was the help. "Your little farm is blocking our residents' access to Canyon Vista Country Club," she said, waving a manicure hand at my grandfather's gate. "This road has been a public easement for years now. We need it open for the gala this weekend. I may not be a fancy lawyer, but I know my history. My grandfather built that road in 1962 with his own hands and a borrowed bulldozer. I still have the leatherwork gloves he wore hanging in the barn. But here was Constance, standing in my dirt, telling me that somehow my private family road belonged to her community now. I carry a little leather notebook everywhere. It's a habit I picked up from my grandfather. He documented everything: weather, cattle prices, rainfall, and I do the same. When I write, I always tap my pencil 3 times first. Sarah used to say I was too polite for my own good, but she also knew that when the notebook came out, I was done playing games. Constance demanded $5,000 in attorney fees, plus the complete removal of my gate within 30 days. If I didn't comply, she was threatening a $50,000 lawsuit that would cost me everything. That was the moment I realized this woman had picked the wrong fight. She saw an old electrician in a beat-up truck. She didn't see the storm coming. Within a week, Constance made good on her threat. I was finishing breakfast when a process server banged on my door. He handed me a stack of official papers, a formal nuisance complaint filed with the county. The legal language was deliberately intimidating, full of phrases like unlawful obstruction of established public easement and willful interference with community infrastructure. My hands were shaking as I read those papers, not from fear, but from rage. $50,000 might as well be $50 million when you're living on Social Security. I couldn't even afford the $500 consultation fee most attorneys wanted just to look at the case. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with documents spread everywhere, feeling more overwhelmed than I'd been since Sarah's diagnosis. The house felt too big and too quiet. I looked at Sarah's photo on the mantel. "What do I do, honey?" I whispered. I could almost hear her voice. Asterisk, use your head, Clayton. Work the problem. Asterisk. I remember my grandfather always said the courthouse holds all the answers if you know where to look. So, the next morning, I drove down to the county records office and paid $25 for a complete property search. The basement of that old courthouse smells like 50 years of musty papers, burnt coffee, and bureaucracy. But I spent the whole day down there with a copy machine and a lot of patience. That's when I found the first piece of the puzzle. My grandfather's original 1962 property deed included something specific: private road and water rights in perpetuity. I took photos of everything with my phone camera and made careful notes in my little notebook. The more I dug, the more interesting things got. See, here's something most people don't know about property law. Easements aren't automatically permanent. An easement is basically permission to cross someone else's land. But that permission has to be legally granted and properly recorded. Just because you've been using a road doesn't make it yours. The records clerk was an older woman named Mrs. Higgins, who had been working there since the Carter administration. When I explained what I was looking for, she got real quiet and leaned in close. That HOA road easement expired in December 2023. She whispered like she was sharing state secrets. I felt my heart skip a beat. "What do you mean expired?" She pulled out a folder that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. "Your grandfather signed a 25-year temporary access agreement back in 1998, when the first development started going in. But temporary means temporary. It expired last December, and nobody renewed it. That meant Constance Heartwell and her precious HOA had been trespassing on my land for 11 months. Constance's response to my initial pushback was swift and nasty. At 6 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday, I woke up to the sound of metal snapping. It was a sharp, violent sound that cut through the morning silence. I ran to the window. The HOA maintenance crew was cutting my fence in 3 different places right along the road where it crossed my property line. The crew leader, a guy who looked uncomfortable with the whole situation, handed me a work order when I ran outside. "HOA attorney says this is legal," he mumbled, refusing to meet my eyes. "We're just enforcing property rights, sir." I watched them take bolt cutters to 60 years of fence line. The smell of diesel exhaust from their truck mixed with the sweet morning air. Within an hour, 12 of my cattle had wandered through the gaps and were causing a traffic jam on Highway 47. A sheriff's deputy showed up to inform me that my livestock were now a public safety hazard. "Sir, we got complaints about cattle in people's front yards," Deputy Martinez explained while I was trying to herd confused cows with a makeshift rope halter. The damage added up fast. $800 for fence repair. Veterinary bills for 1 cow that got spooked and injured her leg on the pavement. And the pure humiliation of chasing livestock through a subdivision while HOA residents filmed on their phones, laughing. But here's the thing about fighting people who think they can intimidate you. Sometimes They hand you exactly the evidence you need. I documented everything. Photos of the cut fence, timestamps on videos, measurements of the damaged sections. I filed a trespassing report at the sheriff's office and demanded that the HOA pay for damages. That's when Deputy Martinez pulled out a file folder that changed everything. We had 6 similar complaints about this HOA in the past year, he said, flipping through pages of incident reports. The Martinez family harassed over a drainage ditch. An elderly couple threatened over tree trimming. A veteran who'd been sued for parking his RV on his own property. The pattern was crystal clear. Cedar Valley Estates HOA used legal intimidation to bully anyone who stood in their way. Document everything. Deputy Martinez advised. They're building a pattern here, and judges don't like patterns of harassment. That afternoon, I drove to the hardware store and bought the materials to repair my fence. But I also picked up something else, a high-definition security camera system with cloud storage. When a fence has been in the same location longer than the neighboring development, that fence line establishes the legal boundary. My grandfather's fence had been marking our property line since before most of these HOA folks were born. I spent that evening installing cameras at 6 different points along my property line. The work felt good. It felt like armoring up. Just when I thought Constance had run out of ways to make my life miserable, she found a new angle of attack. 2 weeks after the fence incident, I came home to find a county inspector standing next to my water well. Mr. Bridwell, I'm here about a complaint filed with the county water authority. Someone's claiming you're illegally drawing from the community aquifer. The inspector handed me a shutdown notice. 48 hours to provide documentation, or face a $10,000 fine and permanent well sealing. My stomach dropped. Without that well, the ranch would be uninhabitable. Constance had brought her own expert, some hydrologist in a suit who was pointing at charts and talking about unauthorized groundwater extraction. I went straight to the barn where my grandfather kept his records. After 2 hours of digging through yellowed paperwork, I found it, the original well permit from 1964. It was signed by Jim Richardson, the retired county engineer. I called him. Even at 82, Jim was sharp. He met me at the ranch the next morning. Your grandfather's well taps the primary spring that feeds the whole valley, Jim explained. Those fancy HOA wells? They're drawing from the spillover of your spring. They aren't losing water because of you. They are dependent on you. That was the leverage. But then I decided to go back to the courthouse one more time to check the HOA's specific easement filing. If Constance was so confident, surely there was paperwork. The clerk couldn't find a current one, but she found an easement document filed in 2017 bearing my grandfather's signature. I stared at that signature, and the room spun. My grandfather died in 2015. Someone had forged a dead man's signature to steal access to his land. The difference was obvious. My grandfather used a fountain pen his whole life. The signature was ballpoint, shaky and hesitant. I realized then that Constance Heartwell hadn't just been the HOA president when this occurred. She had been the legal counsel for Pinnacle Development, the company that built the neighborhood. She personally prepared and filed the forged documents. This wasn't just a property dispute anymore. This was felony fraud. I drove straight to the legal aid office. A young volunteer attorney named Maria Santos looked at the forged signature and the dates. "Clayton," she said, her eyes wide. "This is RICO territory. This is organized fraud." We built a plan. But while Maria built the legal trap, I went to work on the physical one. I'm an electrician. I understand systems. I understand that if you control the flow, you control the outcome. I went to a hardware supply store and bought 3 industrial-grade remote-controlled solenoid valves and a low RAWN wireless control system. Cedar Valley Estates got their water through 3 main lines that crossed my property, illegally based on the forged easement. I spent 3 nights installing those shut-off valves. I buried them, camouflaged them, and wired them to an encrypted controller I could operate from my phone. It was completely legal. They were on my land, attached to pipes that had no legal right to be there. While I worked, Constance got desperate. She tried to bribe the county water inspector, who turned out to be married to my cousin Jenny. He recorded the whole thing. Then she escalated to surveillance. My cameras caught her peeking through my windows. Finally, she sued me for $100,000 for harassment. She wanted to bankrupt me before I could expose the truth. She called an emergency HOA board meeting for Thursday night to rally the residents against me. She planned to present me as a villain destroying their property values. Perfect. I contacted Rebecca Torres, an investigative reporter from Channel 7. She had been investigating developer fraud. When I showed her the forged signature, she cleared her schedule. Everything was set. Thursday evening, 7 p.m. The Cedar Valley Estates Community Center was packed. I parked my beat-up pickup truck between a Mercedes and a Lexus. I walked in wearing my grandfather's Sunday suit. It smelled faintly of cedar and Old Spice. Constance was on stage, flanked by expensive lawyers. She was running a PowerPoint presentation, showing pictures of my ranch and calling me a rural terrorist. "Mr. Bridwell is costing this community thousands," she shouted. "We must crush this legal threat." I sat in the back row, holding my phone. At 7:30 p.m., right as she was asking for a vote to sue me, I opened my app. System status, connected. Valves 1, 2, 3, close. I tapped the screen. Within seconds, the sound of the building's plumbing changed. The hiss of water in the pipes died. A resident in the back stood up. "Hey, the water fountain just stopped working." Phones started ringing in the room. People's spouses at home calling to say the taps had run dry. Constance looked panicked. "This is sabotage," she screamed, pointing at me. "Arrest him." Deputy Martinez stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'm right here. Would you like to explain how Mr. Bridwell owns the water flowing through his property on documents you know are fraudulent?" I walked to the front of the room. I plugged my phone into the projector system Rebecca Torres had helped me rig up. "Actually, Constance," I said into the microphone, "it's my grandfather's water, and you stole it." I flashed the image on the screen. The death certificate, 2015, next to the easement signature, 2017. My grandfather died 2 years before he supposedly signed your legal papers, I told the silent room. Unless he came back as a zombie, you committed felony fraud. The room erupted. Deputy Martinez stepped up, not to arrest me, but to arrest Constance. "Ms. Heartwell, you are under investigation for conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted bribery, and violation of federal RICO statutes." Constance left in handcuffs. The water was back on in 2 hours, but only after the new interim HOA board signed a temporary emergency agreement acknowledging my ownership. The fallout was massive. Constance is looking at 3 to 5 years in federal prison. The law firm she hired? Disbarred. But here is the real victory. The settlement. We settled for $75,000 in back damages for the trespassing, plus the HOA's insurance paid my legal fees. 6 months later, I stood in that same community center. But this time, it wasn't for a fight. It was for the first annual Sarah Bridwell Memorial Scholarship Ceremony. We used the settlement money to create an endowment. That night, 3 high school seniors received full-ride scholarships to technical college for electrical work, welding, and engineering. I went to the cemetery that morning. I touched the cold stone of Sarah's grave. "We did it, honey," I said. "The kids are going to college." I still drink my coffee looking out at the hills every morning. The gate is still there. The road is marked private property. And the water flows clear and cold, just like it did in 1964. Don't let them push you around. Document everything. And remember, sometimes the little guy wins because he knows how to wire the trap. Subscribe for more.